Hey everyone, Ryan here. Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios and to Heavy Reflection. Today I'm going to be tackling a common phrase you'll see thrown around in YouTube comments or forums or maybe even your local guitar shop, and whose intention I don't necessarily disagree with, and I think it's a positive message for the most part, but it oftentimes gets misconstrued and can mislead especially guitarists who are just now getting started. And that phrase is, of course, tone is in the fingers. I'm here to say that that is a commonly held falsehood, that the vocabulary surrounding guitar tone in general really could use some refining, and that it's okay to be a gear nerd. Hell, it's okay to not be a gear nerd. There's nothing wrong with either side. But before we get into that, first, this video is brought to you by Chariotone and the Centura Professional Overdrive. Touted as the most faithful and affordable replica of the legendary stomp box which inspired it, the Centura is offered both fully assembled or as a kit, with an enclosure available in multiple matte and gloss finishes. Order yours at the link in the description below. So many of you have probably encountered this age-old piece of advice where someone might ask, hey, I've got this guitar set up, I've got this amp head and cabinet, or I have a digital modeler that does this kind of thing, and I want to sound like X guitar player, or I heard Y song and I want to kind of achieve this guitar sound. And generally you'll get a couple of replies saying, well, you can use this amp model or add this piece of gear and you'll get closer to that sound. Or someone will say, that's not going to happen with the setup you have. You really need to invest in this. But eventually, in that comment thread, generally you'll find someone that says, why are you even wasting your time, dude? Tone's in the fingers. You're never going to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page because their tone's in their fingers. Hendrix would have sounded like Hendrix through any guitar rig, and James Hetfield still sounds like Hetfield playing through Axe FX products live on stage rather than the Mesa Boogie stuff that he would have normally played through. And that's the message, that's the intention that I don't disagree with. If you're playing through a similar class of guitar gear and quality is there and you still have your same playing style, you're going to sound like you. You know, James Hetfield could plug into or even take the, say, Joe's guitar from Gojira, plug his Charvel into his 5150 rig, it's still probably going to sound like James Hetfield, even though the overall guitar sound is more like Gojira. The problem with that statement arises when people start to take it far too literally, and especially when they assign the word tone to anything that's convenient at the time. I mean, tone it means so much now that it means absolutely nothing. You can look at the Webster definition and it's so vague in terms of, you know, pitch, quality, loudness. I mean, that can mean anything in terms of vague sounds or musicality. We use tone to describe the inherent sound in an acoustic wood. We'll use tone to talk about the control on an overdrive level that changes a frequency curve. A lot of people just be like, yeah, I like the tone on an amplifier. What does that mean? It means nothing, without context. And I know people rag on, including myself, some for, using all these flowery words to describe stuff like with guitar amps, but it's kind of needed. I'm not a person who likes unnecessary language. It's, the whole point of communication is to I'm thinking this, I want to get across this, that's it. Equation over. But when you get into fine details like this, when you're splitting hairs between one tone stack versus another, or the character of a distortion, you kind of need those kind of things. So that's why people will talk about the bite, the high-end frequency content of an amplifier, or the distortion character, or how it sits in a mix, or how the EQ behaves, all these things that are going to be important to some people. Before diving into that aspect of gear obsession, the stance I'll be making in this video is that tone, and when I say tone, it's not going to mean 100% the same thing as what everyone else is going to mean. That's precisely the reason we really need some better vocabulary for this stuff. But tone is merely one variable in the entire guitar sound equation. Because that's what I try to talk about, is guitar sound. Everything you hear in the end result on a recorded guitar is a sound. It's the player. It's the instrument going through amplifiers, going through a digital modeler that's been mixed and mastered and compressed and maximized and limited and all these things that produce the end guitar sound. So you have to throw in more variables to achieve that sound than just having the right gear, than just setting it to where you get the same tone. And I make that argument because you'll see all the time on, say, like my Fractal AX8 videos or Leon's Axe FX 3 videos, or name anyone who's made stuff for the Line 6 and Kemper equivalents, where they'll say, yeah, I downloaded this preset, but I'm not getting the same tone. Yeah, you are. You are getting the same tone that is built in to whatever piece of gear you're using. What's changed is perhaps 2 or 3 things. One of which is your monitoring environment. But if you've listened to that recording through the same monitoring environment, then it should be identical. Second thing is you have a different guitar, which will change things because you have different tonal qualities of pickups and different scale lengths and all these things that can potentially affect the guitar tone. But for argument's sake, let's say every aspect in the signal chain is identical. Let's say they have the same guitar spec'd identically, no errors in terms of manufacturing tolerances. It's literally the same instrument. You're still going to be left with one major variable in that guitar sound equation, the player. And that's why someone like James Hetfield could plug into Gojira's rig and get a Metallica guitar sound. It's still James, he's still down picking. He's still putting his hand in more or less the same positions. He's still applying about the same amount of pressure here. He'll compensate, within the first few minutes of playing a different guitar. It's still going to sound like James. But notice I didn't say the word tone once in any of that because it's not tone. Tone is not in the fingers. Technique is in the fingers. That's not an aspect of guitar playing that I cover on this channel because, well, for the most part, I don't feel I have any authority in that and certainly not good in teaching technique at all. It's still just as important, if not more important, to achieving the end guitar sound compared to having the right gear and all the right settings and the same guitar and all these things. And you can prove that fairly easily. If you take an acoustic guitar, get rid of all the electric stuff, you play on it, hand it to a friend, they jam on it, it's going to sound different. It's going to sound like the same instrument. It still has the same baked-in tone. It has the same potential, same strings, nothing's changed, but it's going to sound like them playing through that instrument because they'll be applying different pressure. They'll be muting strings differently. They'll have probably a different pick angle, maybe even holding their pick differently because I hold mine like a caveman. All these things that is going to make a different guitar sound, but it's the same tone, at least in the way that I'm using the word tone. And that's the big problem that I take with tone is in the fingers. No, it's not. Technique is in the fingers, and its importance should not be downplayed. And I think that's a lot of the reason people are like, I've dialed in the same 5150 settings as Misha. I don't sound like Periphery. Well, you're not attacking the string the same. You don't have the same control. But that's not tone. That's technique. And it can affect the end guitar sound. Again, I make that distinction not because I disagree with the original intention of this sage wisdom. If I played through a 5150 versus a dual rec or a single rec, I'm going to be able to get fairly similar tones. It's not going to be life-changing. And if you're trying to sound like a particular artist, a lot of the times you have a lot more leeway in this sort of stuff. As I've shown on practically all my tone tutorials, you can make a lot of different gears sound similar if you know how to compensate for those differences. And therefore, you should spend time on your technique to make sure you're hitting those right spots to get the end sound you're trying to achieve. The issues arise when it misleads people into chasing this mythical finger tone dragon that doesn't exist, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, it discourages people from exploring guitar gear at all. That's one that really frustrates me, where it's like, oh, guitar gear doesn't matter at all. You should just get better. There's no point in, trying out higher end amplifiers or chasing a different guitar sound because just practice. That's what you should be doing. Instead of worrying about your guitar sound, just practice. And that really frustrates me because no one has any right to tell how someone else should enjoy their hobby. If all you want to do is sit in your bedroom for 8 hours a day and practice sweep arpeggios through your Line 6 Pod 2.0, then get after it. Have fun, dude. That's great. If you're not concerned about sounding any better than this will allow you to do, then that's fine. Because ultimately, you can't outplay your gear. And that's, part of that original intention that I agree with. If you, on the other hand, want to just reamp DIs through a bunch of cool amp heads, you don't care about making your playing any better because you're satisfied with it or it achieves the musical vision that you're trying to accomplish, then hell yeah, do that too. But I think most people lie somewhere, on not quite so much on those polar opposites of the spectrum. So who cares how you enjoy it? There's nothing wrong with playing through, say, a decade-old piece of digital gear if that's what makes you happy, if it accomplishes what you want to accomplish musically. And I totally respect that there's going to be people that either A, legitimately don't care, or B, can't tell the difference between some of these, fairly similar things like a Super Overdrive versus a boutique Tube Screamer clone, or say a couple different high gain amp heads that are kind of in a similar category. Frankly, sometimes I wish I couldn't either, because, it would make my setup much more streamlined and definitely less expensive. And I'm definitely in that boat when it comes to many musical, samples or sound sources. You put a couple different synth sounds in front of me, I have no idea what the difference is. I couldn't tell you which one's a digital VST versus, an analog plug-in or an analog console from the 70s. I couldn't tell you, just by hearing a kick drum, if it's a 20-inch versus 24-inch, or if that one was birch or babingo, or if the snare was brass versus, I just can't. I don't have the ear for it, and I don't care. What sounds good sounds good. And people are going to have that attitude about guitar playing, and that's fine. That is 100% fine. I respect that, but in return, I ask that you respect those that do care, that can tell a difference, no matter how minute or insignificant it might be. And like I said, a lot of this stuff, it's going to kind of come out in the wash at the end. But I'm passionate about this kind of stuff. This is half of what makes guitar playing fun for me. Part of it is technique and figuring out, oh well, how did they do that pinch harmonic there, or how did they get that aggressive pick attack. And then the other part is, how the hell did they make a rectifier sound like that? Or how do they mic this cabinet? How do they get it to mesh with the bass guitar that way? So don't tell anyone else how to enjoy their hobby is really the moral of the story. And I don't know why it needs to be such a pissing contest. As I've attempted to make clear throughout my time with this channel, I try to focus on those products that I think bring a lot of value to their markets. And if you have a baseline budget, if you can afford it at all, it'd be worth having, no matter, what your budget limits may be. But at the end of the day, if you really want a $5,000 amplifier and that's what's going to make you happy and you can afford it and you don't care what anyone else thinks about it, then go for it. Like, awesome. That's what it's there for. It's just, as a reviewer, I'm going to, say things like, well, I think an EQ pedal is a better value than a pedal like this because this is a one-trick pony. You can do other things with it. But if that's what you want, go get it. And no one should be able to tell you to do that or not to do that. So, I mean, it's all companies trying to get your money at the end of the day. So why do people care how they, whether or not it goes to one place versus the other? It kind of bewilders me. So yeah, at the end of the story is really understand the problem you're trying to solve before you start throwing money at it, because something that you may think is a pedal setting or a particular set of speakers might be changing the way you hold your pick, not necessarily finger tone. And furthermore, if someone does want to blow money on that kind of stuff, then let them. If someone wants to just be a god at sweep picking and 8-finger tapping and don't really care that they have the most pristine digital modeler in the world, let them. It's all good. We're all here to enjoy this kind of stuff. So don't tell someone else how to do that. That's pretty much that. Hope you enjoyed this. Any questions, comments, as always, please leave them down below. We will see you next time. Bye.